I gave them everything. My time, my sleep, my loyalty, my brilliance. For over a decade, I was the engine behind Halcyon Systems, the small AI startup her family had nearly bankrupted before I stepped in. When I married Natalie, I thought I was joining a family, not a cartel. Her father, Walter Langston, had the name and the legacy, but no roadmap for the future. I brought that roadmap. I didn't just save their sinking ship, I rebuilt it into a $120 million juggernaut respected across Silicon Valley for its adaptive intelligence platform. And I didn't do it from the sidelines. I coded through the night, pitched to VCs while Natalie was vacationing in Maui, and made the brutal decisions no one else wanted to make. I was more than the CTO. I was the architect of their survival. So imagine the chill that slid down my spine when I walked into a Monday morning boardroom meeting and found Natalie sitting across from me wearing a crisp white suit and the faintest trace of a smirk. She said, "I'd like you to meet our new CTO. Tyler will be assuming your role effective today." Tyler. Her fiancé. Her fiancé. Walter sat at the head of the table, not even blinking. He nodded as if this was just a routine handoff, like trading out a department head or a broken light bulb. I didn't speak. Not yet. Because something deeper than betrayal settled in my bones at that moment. Clarity. I wasn't just being replaced, I was being erased. My name, my code, my sacrifices, traded for a shinier new model. I looked around the room. Some board members couldn't even meet my eyes. Others looked at me like a dog being told to get off the porch. The truth hit me hard. They never intended to share the throne. I wasn't family, I was a tool. A useful one until they thought they found someone better. But what they didn't know, what they had never once thought to ask, was that I had quietly secured the intellectual rights to the very software that powered their empire. Years ago, when Walter was drowning in debt and too proud to read the fine print, I offered my help. In return, he signed something I kept sealed and buried. Until now. Because if they thought they could cut me out of my own creation, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Logan didn't throw the chair across the room. He didn't curse. He didn't break. That would have given them satisfaction. That would have given them power. Instead, he straightened his spine, nodded once at Natalie, and said just 3 words. Noted. Anything else? Natalie looked surprised, as if she expected him to spiral, to fall to pieces in front of the board. But Logan had spent years studying power. Not just coding artificial intelligence, but analyzing human behavior. He had seen this coming, not in full color, but in shadows, in gestures, in late nights where she stayed out with friends and returned reeking of entitlement. Tyler will be taking over development of Helix OS 4.0. Your access has already been revoked. Logan raised an eyebrow, feigning curiosity. So fast. Impressive coordination. Walter Langston said nothing, just chewed slowly and looked past Logan like he wasn't even there. Logan gave a tight smile. Well then, if we're done here, I'll take my leave. No one stopped him. He left the boardroom, walked calmly through the marble halls of Halcyon Systems' 33rd floor, and took the elevator down without breaking stride. No fury, no scene. But rage. Rage sat thick in his chest like coiled wire. He didn't go straight home. He stopped by his private office, small, windowless, and mostly ignored by the new executive crowd. It was the same space he'd used in the early days, before the company had money for rooftop bars and beanbags in the lobby. It still had the safe. Inside the safe was a hard drive and a folder marked Xenon Protocol. He plugged in, heart thudding slowly, methodically. It took less than 20 minutes to download what he needed: versions of every line of proprietary Helix code, documentation of IP contracts, and, most importantly, a scanned copy of the original patent agreement signed between him and Walter Langston 12 years ago. Logan had offered Walter a lifeline back then, when Halion was bleeding cash and couldn't pay developers. In exchange for work and funding, he'd signed over the rights to the initial adaptive learning engine, an engine that still powered every major update to Helix OS. Logan had asked him twice, "Are you sure you want to sign this?" Walter had answered, "If it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. And if it does, we'll all be rich anyway." Well, it worked. Logan walked out of the building that day like a ghost, but not empty. No, he was armed. Not with revenge just yet, but with leverage. By the time he got back to his apartment that night, Logan wasn't just angry. He was calculating. He didn't turn on the lights, just dropped his briefcase, pulled out the patent papers, and laid them across the dining table. He pulled up his laptop, opened the backup of the shareholders' contract, and cross-referenced it with the IP ownership forms. They forgot who had built the foundations. They forgot who had protected the system from collapse during that infamous crash in 19. They forgot who single-handedly architected the neural realignment protocol that saved their flagship product. They forgot Logan Green. But he hadn't forgotten them. By midnight, he had already drafted 3 emails: to a legal firm that specialized in IP protection, to an old contact at the SEC, and to a journalist from Wired who had once called him the invisible father of modern cognition design. This wasn't emotional. This was surgical. At 2 a.m., Logan opened a bottle of whiskey, not to drink, but to toast. "To war," he muttered, raising the glass to the empty room before setting it down untouched. This wasn't about taking back a job. This was about burning their version of history to the ground.
3 days. That's all it took for Logan to strike. While Halcyon Systems was still basking in the illusion of control, Logan filed a cease and desist order citing intellectual property infringement, namely, the unauthorized commercial use of the adaptive learning framework he had legally patented a decade earlier. The ripple effect was immediate. By noon that day, Halcyon's legal team was in chaos. Product launches were suspended, client emails demanded clarification, internal Slack channels swarmed with whispers. Why are their servers shutting down? Why are retail partners pulling listings? By 5 p.m., the board had convened an emergency meeting. At 5:03, Emma called him. He didn't answer. She tried again at 5:17, then 6:01, then one final message at 6:43 p.m. "You can't destroy everything we built together. Please just talk to me." But Logan wasn't interested in words anymore. He had offered transparency, loyalty, legacy. They gave him betrayal and silence in return. Now they could experience what it felt like to be powerless. What Emma and Walter didn't know, what no one at Halcyon had bothered to investigate, was what Logan had been doing with his late nights and rare weekends over the last 18 months. He hadn't just been refining code, he had been reinventing it. In a hidden WeWork downtown, under the name of LumaCore Technologies, Logan had quietly recruited 5 developers and 2 former AI ethics researchers. Paid in equity, sworn to secrecy, they had helped him build an entirely new AI architecture, one that learned not just from user behavior, but from emotional context, real-time language shifts, and predictive patterning. It was elegant, powerful, and terrifyingly fast. They had called it Naira. By the time Halcyon scrambled to recover from Logan's legal blockade, he had already secured a round of seed funding from angel investors who had grown disillusioned with Halcyon's bureaucracy. The media caught wind of the disruption within days. Wired released a headline that read, "The Phantom Founder: How Logan Green Went from Cast-Off to Competitor in 72 Hours." Twitter exploded. Reddit theorized every move. LinkedIn posts dissected his strategy like gospel. Logan hadn't just bruised Halcyon. He had become their greatest threat. From his new workspace, just 8 blocks away from the glass tower where he'd been betrayed, Logan watched the tech world realign. Venture capitalists messaged him at midnight. Recruiters tried poaching his team with 6-figure offers. But no one could outbid loyalty forged in silence. Emma called again. This time her voice cracked through the voicemail. "Please stop. We're hemorrhaging. Walter wants to settle." Logan listened to the message twice, then deleted it. Because it wasn't just about a settlement. It was about setting the tone for every room he'd walk into after this. Power had changed hands, and he intended to keep it. At a private conference 2 weeks later, Logan stood on a minimalist stage, clean-shaven, wearing a charcoal suit. Calm, focused. The room was filled with CTOs, founders, and hedge fund reps. He didn't bring a deck. He brought one sentence. "The future of AI isn't about control. It's about context." Behind him, a demo of Naira responded to a user's email input, not just with suggested replies, but with tone analysis, emotional nuance, and even mental fatigue detection. The applause lasted longer than he expected. By the next quarter, Halcyon's board replaced Walter. Emma quietly sold her shares. And Logan? He wasn't just building a product anymore. He was building a movement. Logan had always believed in building, not breaking. But this time, his rebuild was a quiet form of destruction, a demolition with precision. Within days of finalizing the core of his new business model, he'd already reached out to a few trusted allies from the old days, people who, like him, had grown tired of being overlooked, overworked, and underappreciated. People who had watched Douglas make poor decisions and Emma twist loyalty into currency. 6 of his best engineers, each with a track record of innovation, agreed to join him in secret. It wasn't about revenge, not for them. It was about creating something clean. Something without politics and boardroom games. Something real. With $31 million in venture seed capital, secured in less than 2 weeks after word got out that Logan was up to something, Logan didn't waste a moment. His plan was crystal clear. Build a platform that didn't just rival his former company, it eclipsed it. While Douglas and Emma were still issuing bland press releases and recycling old UX frameworks, Logan and his team were coding through the night, fueled by vision and vindication. They called the new company Northspire. Clean, modern, sharp, and exactly what the market didn't know it had been missing. 31 days after the project's inception, the platform went live. No announcement. No press.
No LinkedIn hype. Just a few quiet invitations to a closed beta targeted toward power users of the old platform, the ones Douglas and Emma had ignored for years. And then everything changed. Within 72 hours, Northspire siphoned off over 40% of the active user base from Logan's old company. It was a digital exodus. Influencers, developers, mid-sized teams, they all moved fast. The migration wasn't just about features. It was about belief, about trust, about the feeling that someone had finally built something for them, not just for stockholders or the quarterly report. Douglas and Emma didn't even realize it was happening until it was too late. On the third day, Logan's phone buzzed. 2 emails. One from Emma, one from Douglas. Both short. Both offering settlement discussions, vague apologies, and a suggestion for a private meeting to rebuild trust. He stared at the screen for a long moment. The same people who had discarded him, watched him walk away without blinking, were now reaching out with corporate diplomacy. He didn't even bother forwarding it to legal. He typed 4 words. No thank you. I've moved on. And hit send. It was more than a refusal. It was a declaration, a full final sentence on that chapter of his life. No anger, no attachment, just distance. The next day, Northspire's servers had to scale up twice to keep up with traffic. Within 2 weeks, investors were calling him, including the very ones who had laughed in his face months ago when he was forced out. He didn't gloat. He didn't burn bridges. He simply didn't answer the calls. Because the truth was, Logan hadn't built Northspire to prove a point. He had built it to prove something to himself. That he was never the disposable one. That the real power had always been in the builder, not the brand. And now, as Northspire continued to grow, Logan finally understood something. Revenge wasn't loud. It was functional. It was sustainable. And it looked a lot like success.
The day of TechCon SF arrived like a storm front. Charged, magnetic, unstoppable. For the first time in over a decade, Logan walked into a convention hall not as someone's right-hand man, not as the silent builder behind a powerful brand, but as the keynote speaker, the name that filled every chair in the room. Founder of Northspire was printed boldly beneath his image on every screen and banner. The man they tried to erase had become the headline. The auditorium buzzed, not from hype, but from something deeper: anticipation. Whispers of Northspire's rise had evolved into headlines, and now industry beaters from across the globe came to see the man responsible. He wasn't flashy. He didn't dress like a billionaire. He walked on stage in his signature charcoal jacket, sleeves rolled, eyes focused, not on glory, but on delivery. The lights dimmed, the crowd quieted, and Logan began. He didn't open with buzzwords or applause-seeking jokes. Instead, he told a story. The story of failure, betrayal, and starting over, not with a roar, but with a whisper. He spoke of integrity in innovation, of choosing the hard path, of building systems that respected people, not just profits. By the time he introduced Northspire's next-generation roadmap, the audience was leaning forward, not blinking. The final slide read, "Power isn't what you take, it's what you build." The room exploded into applause, a standing ovation. Phones lifted, tweets fired off, the media swarmed. Backstage, a reporter from Fast Company asked the question on everyone's mind. If you could say one thing to the people who pushed you out, what would it be? Logan smiled. Not bitterly, not with gloating, just resolved. Never bet against the one who built the system. That quote went viral in minutes. By nightfall, every major tech outlet had a version of the headline, "The Builder Strikes Back. From discarded to dominant, the rise of North Spire. The founder they should have kept." The hotel bar was packed, but Logan wasn't there to celebrate. He preferred quiet, especially tonight. After hours of shaking hands, fielding offers, and hearing praise that once seemed unimaginable, he finally retreated to the lobby lounge, tucked into a quiet corner with a glass of scotch. And that's when she appeared. Emma. The last piece of his past he hadn't seen since that dinner. Her heels clicked softly on the polished marble as she approached. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between composed and shattered. She wasn't dressed for power tonight. She wore something softer, something that tried to hide the sharp edges. "Logan," she said, her voice barely louder than the hum of the lobby jazz. He looked up, calm and steady. "Emma?" She sat down across from him without being asked. For a moment, she just stared at her hands. "You were right," she said. "All along." He didn't reply. "We made a mistake," she whispered. Logan tilted his head slightly, regarding her with the same expression he once used in boardrooms when someone presented a flawed pitch. Not angry, just done. "No," he said quietly. "You made a choice." Emma's shoulders tensed, her lips parted as if to explain, to apologize, to rewind time, but there was nothing left to say. The gap between them wasn't just emotional, it was historic. You were never the placeholder. You were always the core. Logan finished his drink, set the glass down, then stood. "I know." And with that, he walked away, not with bitterness, but with peace. There were no second chances, no rewritten endings, just truth and closure. Back in his suite, Logan stepped out onto the balcony, overlooking the glowing skyline of San Francisco. The city didn't feel like a battleground anymore. It felt earned. His phone buzzed. Congratulatory texts from investors, screenshots of trending hashtags, a request from Time magazine for a profile. He smiled, but not because of the recognition. He smiled because he had walked through fire without letting it change who he was. And in doing so, he had become everything they said he could never be.
In the stillness of his penthouse, overlooking a city pulsing with ambition, Logan finally allowed himself a long, deep breath. The battles had been fought, the betrayals faced. The boardroom wars and silent humiliations were now pages in a book only he could close. But tonight wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace. The kind of peace that comes when you no longer need validation, when you no longer seek retribution to feel whole. Logan hadn't just won back a company. He had reclaimed himself. His worth was no longer tied to someone else's approval or a title given by another man. It came from knowing that he built something no one could take away. Not with schemes, not with signatures, not even with silence. The empire they tried to steal was now stronger than ever because it had grown not just from numbers and contracts, but from clarity, integrity, and purpose. Looking back, each moment of injustice had carved something new into him. Each betrayal had taught him to read people better. Each time he was underestimated had trained him to move with quiet precision. And that was the real lesson. Sometimes, life breaks you, not to end you, but to rebuild you stronger, wiser, and finally free. As the last message from Emma faded into the void of blocked numbers, Logan felt no bitterness, only gratitude. She, like her father, had been a mirror, not of who he was, but of who he refused to become. He turned away from the window, stepping into the next phase of his life, one where his time, his peace, and his power belonged only to him. Because in the end, it wasn't the company that defined him. It was how he reclaimed it with dignity. If you've ever been counted out, underestimated, or betrayed, remember, your story isn't over. It's just waiting for your comeback. Tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment where you rose above what others expected of you? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories of growth, grit, and triumph.